Today, we have the pleasure to be here with Zeno Rocha, the founder of Resend. And Zeno, welcome, man. It's a pleasure for us to be connected and also interviewing you and bringing you to share your insights and background and perspective on developer experience, building a company, developer first company as well. So I'd love to say hi, get an introduction on yourself, your background, and also learn a little bit more about what is Resend.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, I feel like, we need more podcasts like this. I wish when I was getting started with DevRel, there was something like that. So yeah, I'm super happy to see this happening here. Yeah, so I've started as a software engineer. I've always enjoyed building things for myself and for others to experience. So front end was always a passion of mine, still is a passion of mine. And I started with Flash. So I got that transition from Flash to HTML5. And during that transition, I was sharing what I was learning. So I was building experiments. And one day I decided to submit a talk to talk about HTML5. But the problem was, and I remember still to this day, the act of applying for my first call of papers, and they were asking things like, "Oh yeah, what's your bio? What's your background?" And here I was at the university, wanting to learn more about HTML5, but not being an expert any sorts. And I just applied because, growing up, my dad always told me like, hey, if you want to really learn something, you got to teach it. So I'm like, okay, this is an opportunity to teach it, but I'm no expert. So I just applied without any expectations. And then somehow they accepted my application. Maybe I think HTML5 was just like so hyped that they decided to accept. And I was freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, now I need to give a talk. I've never given a talk in my whole life. How can I go about this? And now I need to be in public and people are going to be looking at me. And what if they ask questions in the end? I don't know if I'll be able to answer. I'm sure all of you here went through that experience too, of being just like very insecure about like being in front of others. But I gave that talk and one talk led to the other. So I started doing developer relations without having that title. And then eventually I started leading a developer relations team. And, from there, did a bunch of things. And then that led me to work OS as a VP of developer experience, which was something new, having that title, even like I couldn't find other people with a similar title. But it was a very interesting experience. And then, I decided to give it a shot and see what if I build my own thing. And I was struggling with email, and the whole idea was like, what if we could build a Stripe of email or the Vercel of email? How would that look like? And that was the whole journey getting here. And now Resend has more than 100,000 users, and we've been fortunate enough to serve like Warner Brothers and other amazing companies. So yeah, it's been crazy ride for sure.
That is awesome. And even in terms of their experience when talking in public and trying to build keynotes and trying to have your first, let's say, appearance as a public speaker, that's always, at least to me, a point that freaked me out. And when I was like speaking in public, no matter if there was like a room with 5, 10, 15 people, I was already kind of like, okay, let me prepare, let me get my energy up. So what are your tips to kind of like better prepare for that? Maybe is that kind of like preparing a keynote, also prepare yourself as a speaker, rehearsing that at home? Like what tips can you give to, let's say, young developer experience, developer advocate professionals who want to give a really cool set of first thoughts and present their, let's say, ideas in the best way possible to the audience?
Yeah, for me, the way it works is always the same, no matter, I think I gave like more than 100 talks by now, and the experience is always the same. I apply, and when I apply, I'm super excited. I'm like, oh wow, this event, like look at all these amazing people. And then as and then maybe they accept, and then once they do, I start to freak out. And then I'm like, constantly thinking, why did I do this? Why did I do this to me? Why did I accept? And as I'm building these slides, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not working. The story is not flowing. And then finally, when the event comes and we present, it's so amazing to see the reaction of other people and those small conversations you have after the talk. And then it's like, yeah, it was worth it. So let's do it again. So for me, the tip I'll definitely leave folks with is, that feeling of being scared, and feeling that, oh my gosh, I'm putting myself out there. People are gonna judge me. What if I say something wrong? Oh my gosh, now this is recorded. There's so many things that can go wrong. But the the idea of sharing knowledge is so powerful and it's so impactful, um, especially if somehow you're able to inspire other people. That's something I've noticed in technical events. A lot of presenters, they just want to talk about a specific subject and they want to teach that subject. They're almost like trying to emulate like a past experience with a teacher at school. But when you're in a tech conference, there's definitely a level of like learning that people expect to have. Like they want to see how something works, but they just need a taste of it. You don't need to teach the whole framework. You just got to show like, hey, here are the aha moments. Here's my experience with it. Here are my struggles. And if you can just put a sprinkle of inspiration on it, I feel like you can have an immensely deep impact in people's lives. And that's something I've always tried to do. So yeah, I would highly recommend people to think from that angle too, not just the technical part of the talk, but also how you can get people to take action in their lives and do something different the next day.
That's interesting. And I know that you are like building a global community with more than 100,000 devs in it. So, do you think about building a community around Resend? So, how was that for you, and what has worked best for you?
Yeah, I feel like there's a very important component to every developer company, which is open source. I've had all sorts of experience with open source. Like I had projects that people loved and they used and they talked to their friends about it. I had projects where people absolutely hated and they sent pull requests saying you should delete the entire code base because that way you can rewrite from scratch. Uh, and I feel like there's something really powerful about, even if you're not an open source company, having some sort of open source component. And that's how we approach it at Resend. Like Resend is not open source, but we created this project called React Email, which really took off. And we have maybe 12 or 13,000 GitHub stars now. And it's a project that helps people create better email templates, beautiful email templates, without having to worry with about tables and how your email is going to render on Outlook and Gmail and Yahoo Mail. And you can use that with Resend, or you can use that with our competitors. You can just go ahead and use it. So for me, I feel like a community starts with giving back. And when we were building Resend, and then we're like, oh, but are we going to come out of nowhere and that's it? We're like, no, let's create React Email, launch that first, and then launch Resend. And I still have this Notion doc, pretty old one, very basic. It was called Master Plan. And there were 3 bullet points. The first one was create an open source project around email. The second one was establish ourselves as email experts. And then the third one was launch a SaaS around email. And that whole vision was tied together so that we can create a narrative. And I feel like communities need that, So as we're approaching and trying to think about how can I create a community, there's how can you create a story? Who's the hero in that story? Who is what are the struggles and how that hero can emerge as the hero? What do they have to overcome? So I think a lot about storytelling in anything that we do, in how we approach a tweet, in how we build the company and how we build the community around it.
I love what you just said, Zeno, and it reminded me of a book that I also love, which is, I think it's Story Brand by David Miller or something.
Oh, wow.
I love that book, and it's about creating the story for your brand before actually launching it, and how important it is for people to know and relate to what you're building. And I know that you're also very much focused into developer experience, and we all know how important that is in DevRel. You were VP of developer experience. And I want to know a little bit of your perspective on like what is developer experience and why companies should care about it, and how they can they can improve their experience.
Yeah, I'm sure if you ask 100 different developers, they will probably have 100 different answers. And my definition of developer experience is like the sum of all the little things that you do will create that developer experience. And that could be either extremely good or extremely bad. So, for example, you go to a website and then you're like, oh, let me check this out. And then you're like scrolling and trying to understand what the product does. And then you're like, oh, let me check the docs. And then you go to the docs and the docs look good. And you're like, oh, okay, the getting started is, easy to comprehend. And then you download some sample code and it works the first try on your machine. You're like, oh, nice. And then you experience the value of the product in the first 5 minutes, right? That's a product that if you create those little moments of joy and that whole journey, if it builds up to something great, that's a product where, Monday morning you're going to talk to your coworkers and you're going to say, hey, we should try this thing. I've tried on a Saturday and here's the thing I've built with it. It's so cool. We should use it. It's going to help us solve all these other problems. And the opposite is also true, right? You go to a website and then the design looks a little bit off and you're like, oh, okay. And then you can't really get what the product does right away. So you go to the docs and then there's a typo in the docs or the structure is not really good. The docs website feels completely different from the marketing website. And then you try for the first time and then it doesn't work. And then you try it for the second time, it doesn't. And then maybe there's like mixed double quotes and single quotes on the code, or the code has like a little thing that's broken. That's a product that you're simply not going to use. You're not going to tell your friends about it. And that's the worst thing that can happen to a brand. Like a brand where people are talking about it in a negative way is way better than a brand that people are indifferent about it, that they simply don't care. So I feel like the bar for building developer products is way higher than it used to be. And I feel like a lot of people haven't realized that yet. They feel like it's just about pushing the code to GitHub or pushing a website out, and they feel like it stops there. But I feel like you need a crazy focus and a crazy obsession with building great developer products, because developers are going to spot those little details, either you like it or not.
I would even love to know in terms of like building a great developer experience, having developers interact with the product, maybe even sharing feedback and kind of like jamming on it, let's say on a platform that is a community or maybe in-person events and so on. How do you think the community aspect actually plays a role in shaping the developer experience of a product? And even at Resend more specifically, how do you guys collect feedback from developers? How does that feedback impact your roadmap or your collaborations, your co-marketing opportunities, maybe hackathons and so on? So I'd love to know a little bit more about the community role in terms of the initiatives and the developer experience itself.
It's funny because my career, as I was doing like developer relations, one of my biggest frustrations was the fact that I would gather all that feedback, from like the ground, like speaking to people directly, and they would say like, oh, that tutorial has like this one thing, like, or the product, it doesn't do exactly what I was hoping to do. And I felt myself like forced out of being a developer advocate, because I would bring that feedback to the team, and then there's this whole roadmap that now, like, oh, we need to fit these needs here, like, oh, there's all these things happening. And I transitioned to a product role, which is something I never thought about. I became a chief product officer at Liferay Cloud, and I started to study product management and stuff that, like, didn't come natural to me, because I needed the permission, or I needed the authority to make changes. And also, like, when I thought about, like, okay, building this thing, I'm like, we need to be able to listen to developers and act on it. Because for me, the way I think about feedback when it comes to developers is that you only have one chance. Because the developers are going to be extremely generous with their time, and they're going to tell all the little things that your product is not good at. And there are two things that can happen. You can either, like, listen and act and show that you made the changes, or you can say, oh, thank you so much for your feedback, let me talk to the team, and then silence. And then 6 months goes by and nothing changed. I promise you that if you do the first, they will come back next week and next month as you launch a new product. They are like, oh, look at all these little things, like, here's how you can make it better. And in the second path, you're never going to hear from them again. So I very much value every little thing that is thrown at us, and there's a lot, and it's super hard to prioritize. Every single language has a different need. Every single framework has a different need, a different mental model. So it's super hard to tailor a product to all these different needs. But you got to be respectful, and you got to think in terms of first principles. So one example I can give you is we built Resend, and then recently we talked to a customer, and then that customer was like so frustrated with 2 or 3 things in the product. And they said, like, if you only gave me like webhooks for this thing, I could be able to build all that on my end. Like, I could extend the product. And we're like, oh my gosh, we have webhooks for all sorts of things, but for this thing, we don't have. And we made a mistake, and we didn't follow our first principle of, like, extensibility. People should be able to extend the product regardless of what we're doing, and they should be able to access everything with an API. The moment you break those contracts, now you're just not enabling people to be the best versions of themselves, or to extend the product in the best versions that they could do. So yeah, I highly value developer feedback in a way that, yeah, it's pure gold for me. When you receive, you gotta treat it as like, oh my gosh, like I now have gold in my hands. You can't just put it aside, and just sit it on a Jira backlog somewhere else.
Nice. And Zeno, can you walk us through like how Resend's approach to learning and mastery in DX? How do you facilitate learning and skill building among that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I feel
I
like,
got you.
yeah, I feel like it starts with the quality bar that you set for the team. So when a new team member comes, and this happens in every company, right? They're doing the onboarding, they're trying to learn and understand what the product does. And then maybe you give them the opportunity to write a friction log. That's something we do during our onboarding. Like, we ask people to just download their brains and tell every little friction they find once they're going through the product for the first time, because that's something you can only capture during that moment. And after 6 months, now that person knows the product, so you lost the opportunity of looking to the product with fresh eyes. And eventually, when that person now has more knowledge internally in how the repos are structured, how to submit code, they're going to send a PR. And that PR is going to change the way that person will operate in the company. Because if you look at that PR and you're like, oh, yeah, this is good enough, and you go and you accept, now that person knows that they can just do the good enough. And that's the bar that's going to be expected here. So the next PR that they're going to send, it's going to be good enough. And then the other one, good enough. And for me, I'm always challenging, how can we be exceptional? How can we build something that is so good that, like, who are your heroes? Let me ask you that. Let's play that game. I want to hear from every single one of you. Like, who is like your hero in tech or in DevRel? Yeah, tell me.
I'll go ahead. I think in tech, in DevRel, I would say that my main hero is definitely Lee Robinson from Vercel, which kind of like little fun fact, he's also based in Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm gonna meet him very soon. So I'm impressed by that. I didn't know that was new until I found him on my gym. So yeah, he has always been like a big source of inspiration for me in terms of building developer marketing plans, a solid developer community, and kind of like a perspective around DevRel in general. And I'll say that nowadays, and I think for the last maybe 3-4 months since I kind of like got in touch with you and got you on my network, you also have been kind of part of my heroes. And I'm not just kind of like pulling a little string and kind of like kiss the ass here, but it's just the truth. I love like what you guys have been doing at Resend. So Brina, go ahead.
That's a great question. And for me, I think ever since I started in DevRel, and that I really started when I stopped playing around, when you're like, oh, I'm trying out stuff, I'm creating content. No, when I really got serious, Caroline Lauka was the author that made me learn the most. She wrote that book, Developer Relations, How to Build and Grow Successful Developer Communities.
Nice.
It taught me so much. I also love the business value of developer relations, that other book. I can't remember the name of the author right now, but that would be the person who I've learned the most from in this field. Yeah, up to
From
you.
my end, I just love Francesco. Like, he definitely is my DevRel hero. I love how he puts content, and also like Daily Dot community is also a great community to be following. So he's my DevRel hero.
And the reason I ask is because, when you're building something, I feel like there are these two ways of building, right? You build like, oh yeah, like I have a blog post to write or a video, and you just do the good enough video or the good enough blog post, or you do a blog post that Francesco is going to share, that Caroline is going to share, that Lee Rob will look at that blog post and be like, guys, I got to share this on the Slack inspiration channel from Vercel, because this is so good. We should do that as our own DevRel team. Look at how amazing this piece of content is. And when you put that as the bar, like, we got to build content that is so good that inspires people to build even greater stuff. That for me is like the holy grail. And that's something that I always try to push the team to do it. I try to do that myself. You miss 90% of the time, you miss that bar. But if you don't set that bar, then you're never going to achieve it, right? So yeah, that's my mental model for that.
And you guys, even in Resend, you guys have a ginormous community right now, like 100,000 devs all around the globe. So are there like any strategies in place, even from a developer relations community building perspective, that you guys are trying to put out to maybe prioritize this openness, receive feedback from the community, maybe a super inclusive, diverse approach to receiving new community members, or maybe even engaging them over time? Like, how do you guys feel that?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, and it's something that I wish we could have been doing a much better job. We are such a small team, and as a small team, there's so many trade-offs we need to have. We're very intentional about building a place where people feel safe, and there's diversity in ideas too. Like how can someone from Python come in and say, hey, this is good, or someone from Rails and someone from Elixir or someone from Rust. So I feel like there's a lot of developer tools that are really focused in one type of community, and we try to be open and welcoming to all sorts of developers. There's definitely a lot of things that we gravitate toward React and Next.js just because we are a Next.js shop ourselves. We've been using Next.js for years now. But I think it starts with the intention, and then people can pick it up on that intention. That's something I've found. If you're very true, and if you're honest, and if you're transparent about the things you believe in, people will pick it up on that transparency and emulate that transparency themselves, and they will give harsh feedback if needed. They will give feedback that you might not be ready to receive. But it's better to be in a situation where that's the case versus like just everybody quiet or not really telling you what's happening and stuff. So we do have like the usual like Discord channel. We have like a place for people to hang out. But yeah, that's one of the things I wish we could have been doing a much better job.
Now, Zeno, what is the future? Like, what is the vision of future that you have for DX? And I would love to hear from you how Resend is innovating in this space.
You go to the Stripe docs and you see the API key. That API key is connected to your own logged in user. So the docs are changing and adapting based on your needs, based on your authentication session. So that's how I think about it. Like, how can we build docs that are tailored to a specific profile of a developer? And how can it be embedded into how we build products rather than something you just do in the end, just send to like a technical writer who's like completely isolated from the rest. Yeah, it's such a hard problem to solve too. So much easier said than done, because docs truly is extremely complex. I'm sure you might have seen that example of like there are different types of docs, right? Where there's this analogy with food. There are like guides where it's like a cooking book that is showing like step by step how you can do things. Tutorials are like that, and then you have things that are more explanatory. Like a book about like cooking history. Like that's completely different format. And then you have something that might be more explanatory with videos, and yeah, there's just so many ways you can go about creating docs, but I feel like it needs to be embedded. It needs to be inside the product. We have that on Resend. The docs are inside the product. You go to every single page that we have like emails, API keys, domains, like all these entities, and there's always like an API button on the top right, and then when you click, the whole docs comes in and it's contextualized to what you're seeing. So if you're on a specific domain ID, we populate the domain ID on this doc. So you can copy that code. It's already contextualized for you. That's how I think about it. Like, you gotta be deep into the user experience.
I love that. I feel like I can relate so hard, especially to the documentation side of things, of like outsourcing your documentation to, let's say, an agency, a technical writer, or a firm. For me, whenever I see that the team that was building that product or that resource, the SDK, the API, didn't really think about the developers who are getting to use their product, implement that into their products, other side projects, startups, and so on. They were like, okay, let's push this ball into someone else's court and see what they can do, So I love it, and I completely agree with you on your philosophy on that, and especially integrated with docs. If you want a product, it makes my life so much easier. And even Sabrina and I have a couple of developers building a little project, which I'm not sure if I can let it well with, Sabrina. Can I?
Up to you.
I will not take that. I will not take that and then have my year called once the podcast ends. But there will be a
Not
little
at all.
product that is going to help a lot of developers and product marketers, different professionals within our field to build better initiatives. And our team is also using Embedding Resend, and they also really appreciated one of the support and also the overview of the platform, the documentation, and everything. So it's really cool to kind of like have a full circle moment and have you here together with us in the podcast as well. But
That's
the
awesome.
last question,
I
last
gotta,
but not
I want to check
least,
that out.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think, you know, I see maybe a lot of companies treating like your documentation, the documentation like a hot potato, like some problem that they need to solve quickly. They need to find out someone to put it out, and it's kind of complicated because I think, Zeno, you even mentioned this earlier about the intention, and I do feel like developers are the ones who can notice the intention that you're doing things the most. So if they notice that you're just treating your documentation like that, they're gonna know. You know, I do feel like there's no hiding too much from them. Danny, please go to the next question. Also excited about the soft launch that Danny just made, but yeah, we're planning something good.
just really create a lot of an introduction, but we're building for them.
Nice.
Love it.
Build in public. Build in public.
Yeah.
Build partially in public. We'll start sharing more with you guys soon. But yeah, things are getting out of the ground for the past, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks. We finally have a little testing project, and as soon as we improve that, then also finalize building a documentation for everyone that's going to use our product, then we're okay to share it. But Zeno, as a last but not least question, before we close up and let you take on, I would love to know what kind of advice or maybe tips would you give to founders, developer experience professionals, product leaders in general to improve developer experience in their own companies? And maybe if you give us some actionable steps from, let's say, a company that is not doing so great in developer experience, what are like the critical points that they should be focusing on to take the developer experience and level that up to their community?
There's this thing called the Maslow hierarchy of needs that is brought up quite frequently in the design space because it talks about the foundational needs of a human being and then how you can design products based on those needs. So you can think of it as like a pyramid. And at the basis of that pyramid, you have like the basic needs that we all have, right? Like food, water, sleep, right? Like that's the basics. Once you have that, then there's like safety. And I might get the pyramid wrong every single step, but I'll try my best. And then you have like a sense of safety, right? If you if you feel like in that place no one will harm you. And then from there you can start thinking about, okay, once you have food, once you have safety, then you can start thinking about something more aspirational like friendships and the love of others. And then at the top of that pyramid is like, now you can innovate, now you can be more creative once you have those other things. And it's hard to be creative or innovative if you're feeling hungry or if you are not sleeping well or if you're not feeling safe. I feel like that same hierarchy of needs can be applied to DX. It's hard to think about how we can build, we should like do all these cool merch and all these nice t-shirts and we should give to developers if your API is constantly, having downtimes, or if the performance of your app is not great, if the docs are non-existent or super bad. So I would leave folks with this idea of like, try to map what are the foundational things that you need to have in place. And maybe you already have those, like, maybe the API already works. Maybe we already have pagination. Maybe you already have versioning on the API. Maybe you already have SDKs, but the docs are not there. Okay, so then how we can make the docs better? But if you try to just fix problems at the top of that pyramid, you're going to be missing out on the most important ones. So, yeah. Wow. You asked so many great questions, Beatriz.
I'm just not here in the background, and we're always like making you like, okay, let me think about this.
Yeah. One of my theses is that there's this term that people throw around all the time, like, oh yeah, like we gotta be API first, API first. And I don't feel like we live in an API first world. I feel like we live in a SDK first world. And there's a big difference when it comes to living in a SDK first world, because there are all these expectations that people have around how to consume a product, specifically a developer product. They expect the APIs to be there, but more importantly, they expect an SDK that fits their language, their needs. So if I'm a Python developer, I'm coming in, I'm like, oh, do I really need to create like a REST wrapper on top of this API, or can I just import this SDK using pip or pipe? I don't even know how they call it. Same with Node, same with PHP. We just this wasn't announced yet, but Resend now has an official driver within Laravel. So if you're a Laravel developer, now you can use Resend out of the box. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible, because we're now sitting on the framework level. And I truly believe that there are different layers to developer experience. When you think about Stripe, for example, right, you have the REST API for payments, and you can just call that and charge somebody. But you also have Stripe elements, where you can have like components that are pre-built and you can embed in your app. But they also have Stripe checkout, and you can have self-hosted pages that you can point your domain to that page, and they handle everything. It's not even in your product. And they have also Stripe payment links that you send a link and then you can charge somebody. That's how we started Resend. We didn't build all the Stripe integration. We're just sending links and charging people like that for months. So I love thinking in terms of abstraction layers, and I feel like that's the future of DX. How can you build the absolutely best API experience? How can you build the absolutely best SDK experience for every language? How can you build the absolutely best UI component layer when you think about Clerk and Radix, these companies that are giving you unstyled components that now you can just plug into your app, and now you have the functionality there. That's something that React Server Components enabled us. And then self-hosted pages, and how you can have an amazing experience layer there too. And you can think about that in terms of, as a developer myself, I didn't build the Stripe integration using the API. I prefer to use the no-code Stripe payment link, because that was the easiest and that was the fastest way for me to go to market. So even if you are because that's the thing, right? Like, oh, if you're building an abstraction layer that is no code, for example, developers are not going to use. No, they are going to use. It's just in a different way. So for me, the future is like not a single layer, it's multiple layers, and you got to be excellent in all of those, which is extremely hard.
I completely agree. And we also know that Resend has a few philosophies that you guys follow for developer experience, and one that I find particularly interesting is the documentation is the product. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that, what it means, and how companies can start also implementing it.
Yeah, this is something that I had the chance to absorb during my time at WorkOS. I spent months working on that new documentation there. And one of the first principles that we had in that project was that documentation is not adjacent to the product. Documentation is the product. And most of the times, the way we work as engineering teams is that we are working on a feature, and then we, go through the CI, go through QA, and then go through performance testing, load testing, security testing, and then once like the feature is out and we are ready to talk about it, or like, oh yeah, so let's create the docs. And you can tell that the attention to the docs wasn't there since day one. Or you go to, that example that I gave earlier, or you go to the docs website and it's completely different from the actual website, and it feels, a completely isolated experience. When I go to, it's tough bringing Stripe all the time as an example, but it's hard not to as well. They truly are like a world-class product, and try to think about like how you can peel that onion and get to the core. Like, I feel like to delight people, you first need to cover the basics really well. And covering the basics really well is something that is extremely hard to do already. So look from that angle, and it's always a hard battle. But I would challenge that as engineers, we're all trying to serve. That's our role. We're serving through software. And it's great that we're building all these features, but it doesn't stop when you just ship those. It stops when you both ship the feature in the best way possible, in the fastest way possible, and now you have reading materials to go along with it. Now you have promotional materials to get people excited to even try the thing that you're building. So trying to educate your team and trying to inspire your team to go a little bit beyond of what is expected of them, I feel like that's a really interesting way to approach this.
That's amazing, Zeno. And let's close this off on this amazing note. Thank you so much for being here with us, sharing your expertise, especially in developer experience. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. And I see everyone on the next episode of the Lead DevRel podcast. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.